Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the misty, muddy, and frankly, quite messy history of medieval England. Picture this. The last Roman legionaries are packing their bags, leaving behind a land of crumbling villas and a confused populace. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth, the roads are turning back into muddy tracks, and a sense of uncertainty hangs over everything. You're standing on a windswept hill, watching their ships disappear over the horizon, and you can't shake the feeling that things are about to get interesting. This isn't the polished, chivalrous world of storybooks. It's a time of brutal survival, strange superstitions, and questionable hygiene. You probably won't survive this, at least not with your modern sensibilities intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always cool to see how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together.
You find yourself in a land that's forgetting its own name. The Romans called it Britannia, but that's fading like a dream. Now it's a patchwork of petty kingdoms, each ruled by a warlord with a magnificent beard and a less than magnificent temper. You're in the 5th century, and the power vacuum is real. Into this void come waves of new people from across the North Sea. The Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes. They arrive in long ships, their sails billowing, their eyes set on new land. They aren't invaders in the organized army-like sense you might imagine. It's more of a gradual migration, families and clans looking for a fresh start, sometimes peacefully, often not. You see them setting up villages, their timber-framed halls rising from the earth, the sounds of hammers and saws echoing through the forests that are slowly reclaiming the old Roman fields. They bring their own gods, Woden, Thunor, and the rest of the gang, and their own language, a guttural tongue that will, over many, many centuries, become the English we're speaking right now. It's a strange and unsettling time, a cultural reset button being pressed. You learn to navigate this new world. The old Roman roads are still there, but they're falling into disrepair, haunted by bandits and legends. You learn to read the landscape, to find your way by the sun and stars. You also learn about the strange remedies of the time. Got a headache? They might drill a hole in your skull to let the demons out. That's trepanning for you, a surprisingly common practice. Historians still argue whether this was a purely spiritual or a quasi-medical procedure. Either way, you decide to stick to herbal teas for your ailments. You also hear whispers of a great British leader, a man named Arthur, who is said to be fighting back against the Saxon tide. Is he real? A king? A Roman-British general? Nobody knows for sure, but his legend provides a flicker of hope in the encroaching darkness. It's a story that will grow and change with each telling, a myth for the ages being born right before your eyes.
As the centuries roll by, the patchwork of kingdoms begins to coalesce. Names like Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria rise to prominence. You see the slow, painstaking process of conversion to Christianity. Missionaries arrive from Ireland and Rome, bringing with them not just a new faith, but also the written word. Monasteries become centers of learning and light, places where monks painstakingly copy out manuscripts, preserving knowledge while the world outside is in flux. You witness the famous Synod of Whitby in 664, a surprisingly tense meeting where the Northumbrian king has to decide whether to follow the Celtic or Roman Christian traditions. It's a seemingly small detail, but it aligns England with mainland Europe, a decision that will shape its destiny for 1,000 years. It's a reminder that history often turns on such seemingly minor points. One quirky tidbit you pick up is the use of ordeals to determine guilt or innocence. Accused of a crime? You might have to carry a red-hot iron bar for a set distance. If your hand heals cleanly, you're innocent. If it gets infected, well, you're guilty. It's a system based on the idea that God would intervene to protect the innocent. A bit of a gamble, you think, and you make a mental note to be on your best behavior. But just as a semblance of order begins to emerge, a new threat appears on the horizon. From the north, the Vikings arrive. Their longships are faster, their warriors more ferocious, and their appetite for plunder insatiable. The year is 793, and the raid on the monastery at Lindisfarne sends a shockwave of terror across the land. You see the monks scattered, their precious books burned, their treasures stolen. It's the beginning of a new age of chaos. The great heathen army, as it comes to be known, carves its way through the kingdoms, toppling kings and establishing its own rule in the north and east, the Danelaw. It seems as if the fledgling English identity will be extinguished before it has a chance to truly form. But then, a hero emerges from the kingdom of Wessex, Alfred the Great. He's not your typical warrior king. He's a scholar, a thinker, a man who would rather be reading than fighting. But fight he must. You see him on the run, hiding in the marshes of Somerset, a fugitive in his own kingdom. It's here that the famous story of him burning the cakes originates, a tale that, while probably not true, perfectly captures his state of mind. A king so consumed by the problems of his nation that he can't even handle a simple domestic task. But Alfred is resilient. He rallies his forces, and in a decisive battle at Edington in 878, he defeats the Viking leader Guthrum. He doesn't just win a military victory, he secures a lasting peace, forcing Guthrum to accept baptism and establishing a boundary between his kingdom and the Danelaw. Alfred then sets about rebuilding, fortifying his kingdom with a network of fortified towns or burhs and reforming his army. He also champions education, translating important Latin texts into Old English so that his people can have access to knowledge. He's not just saving his kingdom. He's forging a new sense of English identity, one based on a shared language, faith, and culture. You can't help but admire his vision and determination. He's laying the foundations for what will become England.
The years that follow are a complex dance of war and peace, of assimilation and resistance. The Vikings and the Danelaw gradually adopt Christianity and begin to integrate with the Anglo-Saxon population. Alfred's successors continue his work, slowly but surely reconquering the Danelaw and uniting the country under the rule of the House of Wessex. By the mid-10th century, Alfred's grandson, Athelstan, can rightfully claim to be the first king of all England. It's a momentous achievement, a testament to the resilience of the Anglo-Saxon spirit. You feel a sense of pride in this newly unified kingdom, a land that has weathered so many storms. But the story isn't over yet. The Viking threat hasn't entirely disappeared. In the late 10th and early 11th centuries, a new wave of Danish raids, led by kings like Sweyn Fortbeard and his son Canute the Great, once again destabilizes the kingdom. This time the English defenses crumble, and in 1016, Canute is crowned King of England, as well as Denmark and Norway. You might think this would be another disaster, but Canute turns out to be a surprisingly effective and popular ruler. He respects English laws and customs, and his reign is a period of peace and prosperity. He proves that a Viking can be just as good an English king as any Anglo-Saxon. It's a funny old world, you muse. One of the great what-ifs of this period is what might have happened if Canute's North Sea Empire had held together after his death. But it was not to be. After Canute's line dies out, the English throne returns to the House of Wessex with the accession of Edward the Confessor in 1042. Edward is a pious and well-meaning king, but he has a major problem. He has no children. His long reign is dominated by the question of who will succeed him. This succession crisis is the spark that will ignite the final cataclysmic event of this era. As Edward lies on his deathbed in January 1066, he supposedly names the powerful English Earl, Harold Godwinson, as his heir. But across the Channel, another claimant is watching and waiting, William, Duke of Normandy. He claims that Edward had once promised the throne to him, and that Harold had sworn an oath to support his claim.
The stage is set for a three-way struggle for the crown, with the Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada, also throwing his hat into the ring.
It's a year of destiny. Harold is crowned king, but his reign is immediately challenged. He has to march his army north to face Hardrada's invasion, which he successfully repels at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. It's a stunning victory, but it comes at a terrible cost. His army is exhausted, and just days later, he receives the news he's been dreading. William has landed in the south. Harold is forced to march his weary troops the length of the country to face this new threat. The two armies meet on a hill near Hastings on October 14th, 1066. You stand on the sidelines, a silent witness to one of the most pivotal battles in English history. The fighting is brutal, a clash of shields and swords that lasts all day. The English shield wall holds firm for hours, but eventually a combination of feigned retreats and relentless cavalry charges begins to take its toll. And then the decisive moment. Harold is struck in the eye by an arrow and cut down. With their king dead, the English resistance collapses. William the Conqueror has won. The Anglo-Saxon era is over. A new chapter in England's story is about to begin, written in French and sealed with a Norman sword.
The dust settles on the battlefield of Hastings, and you find yourself in a land utterly transformed. The Anglo-Saxon aristocracy is decimated, replaced almost overnight by a new Norman elite. William, now known as William the Conqueror, isn't just a new king, he's a revolutionary. He brings with him a different language, Old French, a different legal system, and a different way of organizing society. You see the immediate impact. Castles, those imposing stone fortresses, begin to sprout up across the landscape. They're not just defensive structures, they're symbols of Norman power, designed to intimidate and control the conquered population. You watch as Motte and Bailey castles, simple earth mounds topped with wooden towers, are quickly erected, then later replaced by more permanent stone keeps. It's a stark visual reminder of who's in charge now. Life under the Norman yoke, as it comes to be known, is a mixed bag. For the Anglo-Saxon peasantry, not much changes immediately. You still toil in the fields, still pay your dues, but now your lord speaks a different tongue and demands fealty in a new way. For the Anglo-Saxon nobility, it's a disaster. Their lands are confiscated, their power stripped away. Many flee, some become outlaws, and a few try to adapt, learning the new language and customs. You hear stories of resistance, of rebellions brutally suppressed, like the harrying of the North, where William lays waste to vast swaths of land to crush dissent. It's a harsh lesson in the consequences of defiance. One mainstream historical fact that really highlights this shift is the Domesday Book, commissioned by William in 1085. You see the royal commissioners fanning out across the country, meticulously recording every piece of land, every pig, every plow. It's an astonishing feat of administration, a comprehensive survey designed to assess the wealth of the kingdom and ensure that taxes are collected efficiently. It's also a powerful statement of ownership. William wants to know exactly what he's conquered and who owns what. It's a bit like a medieval census, but with far more serious implications for those being counted. Historians still argue whether the Domesday Book was primarily a tool for taxation or a means of asserting royal control and legitimizing William's conquest. The language barrier is immense. You hear the Norman lords speaking their elegant French, while the English commoners continue with their rougher Anglo-Saxon. This linguistic divide will, over centuries, blend and evolve into Middle English, the language of Chaucer. But for now, it's a source of confusion and sometimes accidental comedy. Imagine trying to explain to your new lord that you've only got 3 sheep, not 300, because of a mispronunciation. You also notice the introduction of new legal concepts. Trial by combat, for instance, becomes more common. Accused of a crime? You might have to fight your accuser to prove your innocence, with God supposedly granting victory to the righteous. It's a dramatic, if somewhat terrifying way to settle disputes. You'd rather just pay the fine.
The church also undergoes a significant transformation. William replaces English bishops and abbots with Normans, bringing the English church more closely in line with the practices of continental Europe. New cathedrals and monasteries, built in the grand Romanesque style, begin to rise, dwarfing the older, simpler Anglo-Saxon churches. You see the sheer scale of these building projects, the immense effort and resources poured into them. It's a testament to the Normans' ambition and their belief in their divine right to rule. One quirky tidbit you might observe is the Norman fondness for hunting. They introduced strict forest laws, reserving vast tracts of land for royal hunting grounds. Poaching, even for a rabbit, can result in severe penalties, including blinding or even death. It's a stark illustration of the new power dynamics, where the king's pleasure takes precedence over the needs of the common folk. You learn to walk quietly through the woods, just in case. William's reign, though brutal in its establishment, brings a period of relative stability after the chaos of the Viking Age. He consolidates power, establishes a strong central government, and integrates England more fully into the European political landscape. When he dies in 1087, the succession is not smooth. His sons, William II, Rufus, and Henry I, squabble over the throne. You witness the constant jockeying for power, the shifting alliances, and the occasional outright warfare between brothers. It's a reminder that even kings, especially new ones, face challenges from within their own families. Henry I, in particular, is a shrewd and effective ruler. He strengthens the royal administration, establishes a system of itinerant justices, and even attempts to reconcile the Norman and English populations through strategic marriages and policies. He's known for his legal reforms, and you might find yourself in a royal court watching justice, or at least the Norman version of it, being dispensed. But then comes a period known as the Anarchy. After Henry I's death in 1335, his daughter Matilda and his nephew Stephen fight a bitter civil war for the throne. You see the country plunged into chaos, castles changing hands, lands laid waste, and the common people suffering immensely. It's a grim reminder of what happens when there's no clear succession. The chroniclers of the time describe it as a period when Christ and his saints were asleep. You might find yourself caught between warring factions, forced to choose sides, or simply try to survive. It's a time when local lords wield immense power, building their own castles without royal permission, and imposing their own arbitrary rule. The central authority that William the Conqueror worked so hard to establish seems to unravel. It's a truly miserable time to be alive, and you yearn for a strong hand to restore order. Eventually, in 1154, Matilda's son, Henry Plantagenet, ascends to the throne as Henry II, bringing an end to the anarchy and ushering in a new dynasty. He's a formidable figure, energetic and intelligent, with a vast empire stretching across France. You see him immediately set about restoring royal authority, tearing down illegal castles, and re-establishing the legal system. He's a legal reformer, establishing the foundations of English common law, which is still in use today. He introduces trial by jury, a significant step away from the old ordeals in trial by combat. You might even find yourself called to serve on a jury, a novel experience in this age. He also clashes famously with Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, over the rights of the church. It's a dramatic power struggle that culminates in Becket's murder in Canterbury Cathedral in 1170. You hear the shockwaves reverberate across Europe, and Henry is forced to do public penance. It's a stark reminder of the immense power of the church in medieval society and the limits of even a powerful king's authority. This conflict, though tragic,
ultimately strengthens the king's position relative to the church in the long run, as it forces a re-evaluation of their respective spheres of influence. Henry II is a king who leaves a lasting legacy, shaping the legal and administrative landscape of England for centuries to come.
With Henry II's reign, you enter the heart of the Plantagenet Era, a dynasty that will shape England for over 3 centuries. After Henry, his sons, Richard the Lionheart and John, take center stage. Richard, as you might imagine from his nickname, is a warrior king, more interested in crusading than ruling England. You see him leading armies across Europe, a heroic figure, but one who spends very little time in his own kingdom. He's a legend in his own time, but his absence means England is largely run by his ministers, and the coffers are constantly drained to fund his foreign adventures. It's a bit like having a rock star as a king. Exciting, but not always practical for day-to-day governance. One quirky tidbit about Richard is that he supposedly had a pet lion, which he rescued from a dungeon and which then became his loyal companion. While almost certainly a myth, it perfectly encapsulates the romantic image of the king. Then comes his younger brother, John. Now, John is often portrayed as the villain of the piece, and for good reason. He's greedy, untrustworthy, and constantly at odds with his barons. You witness his disastrous foreign policy, losing most of England's continental possessions to the French king, Philip Augustus. This loss of Normandy, in particular, is a huge blow to the Plantagenet prestige and forces the English monarchy to focus more on its island kingdom. But John's biggest blunder comes closer to home. His constant demands for money, his arbitrary rule, and his disregard for feudal custom pushes barons to the breaking point. You see them, a united front, confronting him at Runnymede in 1215. It's a tense standoff, and John, with no other option, is forced to put his seal to a document that will forever change the course of English history, Magna Carta. This isn't some grand declaration of human rights as we understand it today. It's a feudal document, a peace treaty between the king and his rebellious barons designed to protect their specific rights and privileges. But its significance is immense. It establishes the principle that even the king is subject to the law, a foundational concept for constitutional government. You hear the whispers of no taxation without representation centuries before the American Revolution. Historians still argue whether Magna Carta was a revolutionary document or merely a conservative attempt to restore traditional feudal rights. Either way, it's a landmark moment, and you feel the shift in the balance of power.
After John's ignominious reign, his young son, Henry III, inherits a kingdom in turmoil. Henry is a pious and cultured king, but he's also weak and easily influenced, particularly by his foreign relatives. You see him pouring money into grand building projects like the rebuilding of Westminster Abbey and indulging in lavish ceremonies. But his extravagance and his reliance on foreign advisors alienate his English barons, who feel increasingly marginalized. This leads to another period of intense royal struggle, culminating in the Provisions of Oxford in 1258, which effectively placed the king under the control of a baronial council. It's a bold attempt to limit royal power, and you witness the beginnings of what will eventually evolve into Parliament. Simon de Montfort, a powerful baron, emerges as the leader of this reform movement. He even calls a parliament in 1265 that includes representatives from the towns, a truly groundbreaking step. You might find yourself rubbing shoulders with merchants and burgesses, people who would never have had a voice in national affairs before. It's a brief but significant experiment in broader representation, though it ultimately fails when Montfort is defeated and killed at the Battle of Evesham. Henry III's son, Edward I, is a very different kind of king. Known as Longshanks and the Hammer of the Scots, he's a formidable figure, a warrior, and a brilliant administrator. You see him consolidating royal power, reforming the law, and attempting to bring all of Britain under English rule. His campaigns in Wales are brutal but effective, leading to the construction of magnificent castles like Carnarvon and Conway, symbols of English dominance.
You might even hear the story of him presenting his newborn son as the first English Prince of Wales, a clever move to appease the conquered Welsh. His wars with Scotland are less successful, despite initial victories. You witness the rise of Scottish heroes like William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, and the fierce resistance they offer. It's a long, drawn-out conflict, a constant drain on English resources. Edward also further develops Parliament, using it as a tool to raise taxes for his wars. He understands that if he wants money, he needs the consent of the realm, or at least its most powerful elements. You see the knights of the shires and the burgesses of the towns becoming increasingly important players in national politics. It's a gradual evolution, but the foundations of a representative assembly are being laid.
Edward II, Edward I's son, is a tragic figure. He's more interested in personal relationships and entertainment than in the serious business of kingship. You see his reign plagued by factionalism, with powerful barons vying for influence and openly challenging his authority. His close relationship with Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight, particularly enrages the English nobility, leading to Gaveston's eventual execution. It's a messy, undignified period for the monarchy. The ultimate humiliation comes in 1314 at the Battle of Bannockburn, where Edward II's massive English army is decisively defeated by Robert the Bruce's smaller Scottish force. It's a crushing blow to English prestige and effectively secures Scottish independence for centuries. You feel the collective sigh of despair across England. Edward II's reign ends in disaster, with his queen, Isabella, and her lover, Roger Mortimer, leading a rebellion that deposes him. He is eventually murdered in a truly gruesome fashion, a stark reminder of the dangers of being a weak king in a brutal age. It's a bit like a medieval soap opera, but with much higher stakes and far more uncomfortable endings. His son, Edward III, restores Plantagenet glory. He is a chivalrous, ambitious king, and his reign marks the beginning of the 100 Years' War with France. You see him claiming the French throne through his mother, Isabella, and launching a series of devastating campaigns. The battles of Crécy, 1346, and Poitiers, 1356, are stunning English victories, showcasing the effectiveness of the English longbow. You witness the English archers, often commoners, raining down arrows on the heavily armored French knights, a truly revolutionary shift in warfare. It's a moment when the common soldier begins to prove his worth on the battlefield. These victories bring immense prestige and plunder to England, and you feel a surge of national pride. Edward III also establishes the Order of the Garter, a prestigious chivalric order, further cementing the ideals of knighthood and honor. It's a golden age of chivalry, at least on the surface. But beneath the glittering armor and grand tournaments, the seeds of future conflict are being sown. The constant warfare is expensive, and the demands on the English populace are immense. The stage is set for the next great challenge that will sweep across Europe and fundamentally alter the course of history.
Edward II, Edward I's son, is a tragic figure. He's more interested in personal relationships and entertainment than in the serious business of kingship. You see his reign plagued by factionalism, with powerful barons vying for influence and openly challenging his authority. His close relationship with Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight, particularly enrages the English nobility, leading to Gaveston's eventual execution. It's a messy, undignified period for the monarchy. The ultimate humiliation comes in 1314 at the Battle of Bannockburn, where Edward II's massive English army is decisively defeated by Robert the Bruce's smaller Scottish force. It's a crushing blow to English prestige and effectively secures Scottish independence for centuries. You feel the collective sigh of despair across England. Edward II's reign ends in disaster, with his queen, Isabella, and her lover, Roger Mortimer, leading a rebellion that deposes him. He is eventually murdered in a truly gruesome fashion. A stark reminder of the dangers of being a weak king in a brutal age. It's a bit like a medieval soap opera, but with much higher stakes and far more uncomfortable endings.
His son, Edward III, restores Plantagenet glory. He's a chivalrous, ambitious king, and his reign marks the beginning of the 100 Years' War with France. You see him claiming the French throne through his mother, Isabella, and launching a series of devastating campaigns. The battles of Crécy, 1346, and Poitiers, 1356, are stunning English victories, showcasing the effectiveness of the English longbow. You witness the English archers, often commoners, raining down arrows on the heavily armored French knights, a truly revolutionary shift in warfare. It's a moment when the common soldier begins to prove his worth on the battlefield. These victories bring immense prestige and plunder to England, and you feel a surge of national pride. Edward III also establishes the Order of the Garter, a prestigious chivalric order, further cementing the ideals of knighthood and honor. It's a golden age of chivalry, at least on the surface. But beneath the glittering armor and grand tournaments, the seeds of future conflict are being sown. The constant warfare is expensive, and the demands on the English populace are immense. The stage is set for the next great challenge that will sweep across Europe and fundamentally alter the course of history.
Amidst this chaos, the 100 Years' War continues, though with intermittent truces. Edward III's grandson, Richard II, inherits the throne as a child. His reign is marked by growing social unrest. The peasants, emboldened by the labor shortages and frustrated by the continued high taxes to fund a war, finally erupt in rebellion. In 1381, the Peasants' Revolt, led by figures like Wat Tyler and the radical preacher John Ball, sweeps across England. You might find yourself marching alongside them, a pitchfork in hand, demanding an end to serfdom and a fairer society. They march on London, burning property, and even executing some of the king's officials. It's a terrifying moment for the ruling class, a genuine threat to the established order. Young King Richard, just 14 years old, bravely rides out to meet the rebels, promising reforms. The revolt is eventually suppressed, its leaders executed, but the message is clear: the common people are no longer content to suffer in silence. It's a powerful demonstration of collective action, even if it doesn't immediately achieve all its goals. It's a bit like a medieval flash mob, but with more burning and less dancing. Richard II's reign is ultimately a tragic one. He attempts to rule as an absolute monarch, alienating his powerful nobles and even executing some of them. He's a complex character, cultured and artistic, but also paranoid and vindictive. You see him making increasingly erratic decisions, leading to a loss of support. His cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, seizes the opportunity. While Richard is away in Ireland, Henry returns from exile, gathers support, and eventually deposes Richard in 1399. Richard is imprisoned and later dies, likely murdered. It's the first time since the Norman Conquest that an English king has been deposed, and it sets a dangerous precedent. The House of Lancaster, with Henry IV as its first king, now sits on the throne. This act of usurpation will have long-lasting consequences, sowing the seeds for future dynastic conflict. Henry IV spends much of his reign consolidating his power, dealing with rebellions from disgruntled nobles and the Welsh, led by Owen Glyndwr. You witness the constant struggle to maintain control, the endless cycle of plots and counterplots. His son, Henry V, is a different breed. He's a charismatic and brilliant military leader, and he revives the 100 Years' War with renewed vigor. You see him leading his army to the famous victory at Agincourt in 1415, a battle that once again showcases the devastating power of the English longbow against overwhelming French numbers. It's a truly inspiring moment, a triumph against the odds, and you feel a surge of national pride. Henry V goes on to conquer much of northern France, and through the Treaty of Troyes, he marries the French king's daughter and is named heir to the French throne. It seems as if England is on the verge of achieving its long-held ambition of uniting the crowns of England and France. It's a moment of immense triumph, a peak in England's medieval power.
But fate, as it often does, intervenes. Henry V dies prematurely in 1422, leaving his infant son, Henry VI,
as king of both England and France. This is where things start to unravel. You see, the English gains in France slowly eroded, especially with the emergence of Joan of Arc, a peasant girl who inspires the French to renewed resistance. The English, despite their initial successes, are eventually pushed back. The war becomes increasingly unpopular at home, a costly and seemingly endless drain on resources. By the mid-15th century, England has lost almost all its French possessions, retaining only Calais. The dream of a dual monarchy is shattered, and the long, exhausting conflict finally winds down, leaving England exhausted and deeply divided. The returning soldiers, many of them unemployed and disaffected, contribute to a growing sense of instability. The stage is now set for the final, brutal act of medieval English history, a conflict that will tear the country apart from within. The end of the Hundred Years' War leaves England in a precarious state. The military glory has faded, the French possessions are lost, and the country is left with a child king, Henry VI, who grows into a weak and often mentally unstable ruler. You feel the tension building, a sense of unease that permeates society. The great noble families, many of whom have their own private armies and vast estates, begin to assert their power, vying for influence over the weak king. It's a dangerous game of thrones, played out in the courts and castles of England. It's ripe for internal conflict, and it's not long before the simmering resentments boil over into open warfare. This is the era of the Wars of the Roses, a dynastic struggle between two branches of the Plantagenet family, the House of Lancaster, whose emblem is a red rose, and the House of York, represented by a white rose. You see the country divided, families torn apart as allegiance shifts and battles rage. It's a brutal, confusing conflict, characterized by shifting alliances, betrayals, and swift changes of fortune. The battles are often small, but incredibly bloody, with no quarter given. You might find yourself caught in the middle, forced to choose a side, or perhaps just trying to keep your head down and survive. One mainstream historical fact is that the Wars of the Roses effectively wiped out a significant portion of the Old English nobility. The constant fighting and executions meant that many ancient aristocratic lines were extinguished, paving the way for a new social order. It's a bit like a very violent game of musical chairs, where the music stops and a lot of people lose their seats permanently. Historians still argue whether the Wars of the Roses were primarily a dynastic struggle or a reflection of deeper social and economic tensions.
The conflict begins in earnest in the mid-1450s. Henry VI's periods of mental incapacity allow Richard, Duke of York, to assert his claim to the throne. You witness the initial skirmishes, the uneasy truces, and the eventual descent into full-scale war. The Battle of Towton in 1461, fought in a blizzard, is one of the largest and bloodiest battles ever fought on English soil, resulting in a decisive victory for the Yorkists. Edward IV, Richard of York's son, is crowned king. He's a charismatic and capable ruler, but his reign is far from secure. You see the Lancastrians, led by Henry VI's formidable queen, Margaret of Anjou, continuing to fight, often from exile. The throne changes hands multiple times, a dizzying back and forth that leaves everyone exhausted and uncertain of the future. One quirky tidbit from this period is the widespread use of livery and maintenance, where powerful lords would retain large numbers of followers, often dressed in their distinctive colors, livery, who would then act as their private armies and enforce their will. It's a practice that contributes significantly to the instability of the era, as these private armies often clash with each other, even when the king is nominally in charge. Edward IV's reign is interrupted by a brief restoration of Henry VI, orchestrated by the cunning Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker. You see the bewildering spectacle of a deposed king being put back on the throne, only to be deposed again shortly after. Edward IV eventually regains his throne, but the instability continues. When he dies prematurely in 1483, his young sons, Edward V and Richard, Duke of York,
are placed in the care of their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. What happens next is one of the most enduring mysteries of English history. The young princes are lodged in the Tower of London, ostensibly for their safety, and then they simply disappear. You hear the rumors, the whispers of murder, and the finger of suspicion points squarely at their uncle. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, is crowned King Richard III. He's a controversial figure, often portrayed as a hunchbacked villain, but his true character remains a subject of intense debate. You might find yourself wondering about the fate of the princes, a chilling, unsolved mystery that hangs over the entire period. Richard III's reign is short and turbulent. He faces immediate opposition from those who question his legitimacy and suspect him of the prince's murder. The Lancastrian cause, though seemingly crushed, finds a new champion in Henry Tudor, a distant relative of the Lancastrian line who has been living in exile in Brittany. You see him gathering support, building an army, and preparing for a final confrontation. The stage is set for the decisive battle that will bring an end to the Wars of the Roses and usher in a new era. On August 22, 1485, the armies of Richard III and Henry Tudor meet at the Battle of Bosworth Field. It's a tense, hard-fought battle, with the outcome uncertain until the very end. Richard III, fighting bravely, is eventually cut down, becoming the last English king to die in battle. You witness the dramatic moment when his crown, found in a hawthorn bush, is placed on Henry Tudor's head. The Wars of the Roses are finally over.
Henry Tudor, now King Henry VIII, faces the monumental task of reuniting a fractured kingdom. He's a shrewd and cautious ruler, determined to restore stability and rebuild royal authority. You see him marrying Elizabeth of York, Edward IV's daughter, symbolically uniting the warring houses of Lancaster and York and bringing an end to the dynastic conflict. The red and white roses are combined to form the Tudor rose, a powerful symbol of unity and peace. He suppresses remaining Yorkist rebellions, often through cunning rather than brute force, and carefully manages the royal finances, building up a treasury that will be crucial for his successors. He's not a glamorous king, but he's an effective one, laying the groundwork for the powerful Tudor dynasty that will follow. You feel a sense of relief, a collective sigh as the long, bloody chapter of civil war finally closes. The medieval period, with its feudal loyalties and constant warfare, is slowly but surely drawing to a close, and the dawn of a new age is on the horizon.
With Henry VII's victory at Bosworth Field, you stand at the cusp of a new era. The medieval period, with its distinct social structures, its feudal loyalties, and its often brutal and localized conflicts, is fading into history. The Tudor dynasty, which Henry establishes, marks the beginning of early modern England, a time of stronger central government, religious upheaval, and global exploration. You see the remnants of the old world slowly giving way to the new. The great feudal lords, whose power once rivaled the kings, are now largely subdued, their private armies disbanded. The focus shifts from land and military might to trade, diplomacy, and the burgeoning power of the state. It's a subtle but profound transformation, and you can feel the winds of change blowing through the land. Henry VII, the first Tudor king, is a master of finance and administration. You witness his meticulous attention to detail, his careful management of the royal treasury, and his shrewd diplomatic maneuvers. He avoids costly foreign wars, preferring to secure England's position through alliances and strategic marriages for his children. He's not a king of grand gestures or military glory, but one of quiet consolidation and careful planning. He understands that a stable kingdom needs a strong financial foundation. He uses various methods to raise revenue, some of which are quite unpopular, but they ensure the crown's solvency. One mainstream historical fact is his establishment of the Court of Star Chamber, a royal court that dealt with powerful nobles who were too influential to be controlled by ordinary courts. It's a controversial institution, but it effectively curbs the power of the aristocracy and reinforces royal authority.
It's a bit like a medieval version of a special prosecutor, designed to keep the big fish in line. Historians still argue whether Henry VII's reign was a period of continuity or a radical break from the medieval past. The societal landscape continues to evolve. The Black Death, though long past, has left an indelible mark, accelerating the decline of serfdom and giving rise to a more mobile and assertive peasantry. You see the growth of towns and cities, centers of trade and craftsmanship, where new opportunities emerge for those willing to work. The merchant class gains increasing influence, their wealth challenging the traditional dominance of the landed aristocracy. Education, though still largely the preserve of the church and the wealthy, begins to expand, with new grammar schools being founded. The printing press, introduced to England by William Caxton in the late 15th century, revolutionizes the dissemination of knowledge. You might even find yourself poring over a newly printed book, marveling at the speed and efficiency with which information can now be shared, a stark contrast to the painstaking work of monastic scribes. It's a quiet revolution, but one that will have profound effects on literacy and intellectual life.
Religious life, too, is on the cusp of dramatic change. While England remains a Catholic country under Henry VII, the seeds of the Reformation are already being sown on the continent. You hear whispers of new theological ideas, of challenges to the authority of the Pope, and of calls for reform within the Church. These ideas will explode into full-blown religious upheaval under Henry VII's son, Henry VIII, fundamentally altering England's relationship with Rome and leading to the establishment of the Church of England. But for now, the old ways largely persist, though with a growing undercurrent of dissent and questioning. One quirky tidbit from this transitional period is the increasing popularity of mystery plays, religious dramas performed by guilds in towns, often depicting biblical stories. You might attend one, watching as local craftsmen bring stories of creation and salvation to life with elaborate costumes and special effects. It's a form of popular entertainment that blends religious instruction with community participation, a vibrant part of medieval life that will soon be suppressed by the more austere Protestant reformers. The shift from the medieval to the early modern period isn't a sudden, sharp break, but a gradual transition, a blurring of lines. You see elements of the old persisting alongside the new. Knights in shining armor still exist, but their role on the battlefield is diminishing with the rise of gunpowder weapons. Feudal castles are still standing, but they're increasingly being replaced by grand country houses built for comfort and display rather than defense. The power of the monarchy is growing, centralizing authority and laying the groundwork for the absolute monarchs of the 17th century. The concept of a unified England is stronger than ever, forged through centuries of conflict and consolidation. You feel a sense of national identity solidifying, a shared history and destiny emerging from the patchwork of kingdoms and cultures that once defined the island. Henry VII's reign, though often overshadowed by his more famous son, is crucial. He brings stability, ends the dynastic wars, and builds a strong financial foundation for the crown. He ensures a peaceful succession, something that had been a rarity in English history for centuries. When he dies in 1509, he leaves behind a secure throne, a full treasury, and a kingdom ready for the dramatic changes that Henry VIII will bring. The medieval period, with its unique blend of faith, feudalism, and frequent warfare, has run its course. You've witnessed its birth from the ashes of Roman Britain, its struggles against Viking invaders, its transformation under Norman rule, its internal conflicts, and its eventual gradual decline. You've seen the rise and fall of dynasties, the triumphs and tragedies of kings and commoners alike. It's been a long, winding journey through a fascinating and often brutal age.
And now, as the last echoes of the medieval bells fade into the quiet of the night, you can feel the stillness settling around you.
The grand narratives of kings and battles, the whispers of ancient forests, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, they all gently recede, like the tide pulling back from the shore. You've journeyed through centuries, seen the birth of a nation, and witnessed the slow, inexorable march of time. The air is cool, the world outside your window is calm, and the stories have done their work, weaving themselves into the fabric of your dreams. There's nothing left to do but let your mind drift, to embrace the quiet, and to let the echoes of history lull you into a peaceful slumber. Rest easy now, knowing that the past, in all its complexity and wonder, is always there, waiting for you to revisit it whenever you need a gentle escape. Just breathe, let go, and allow the quiet to carry you away.